47.3 meters. Rebecca's measuring tape snapped taut across the ceremonial platform where her sister would pledge loyalty to humanity's killers in 72 hours. She began planning the most important ceremony of her career. The platform stretched before her like an altar. Same dimensions as the grand ballroom where she'd first learned that perfection wasn't about control. It was about surviving her father's drunken rages by making everything so flawless he couldn't find fault. Her hands moved automatically, adjusting positions that would look like crowd management to alien observers. Section A, near the Eastern Service entrance. Section B, around the Central Plaza. Section C, by the medical stations. Every choice, a promise. Every measurement, a weapon. The air chilled. That metallic ozone smell that made her teeth ache. Human Sanders, Zethis, materialized beside her workstation, 8 feet of crystalline death in a tailored suit. When he spoke, the harmonic vibrations made her sternum buzz with wrongness. Timeline confirmation required. Ceremony participants, 12,000 humans. Duration, 47 minutes. Compliance metrics must achieve 97.3% or higher. Rebecca met those alien eyes and smiled, the same professional smile she'd perfected for difficult clients. Just like any wedding, really. Every detail matters. Zethis studied her for a moment, then moved on. Rebecca's fingers found the loose panel behind her workstation, the fiber optic cable she'd been fixing for weeks. Not today. Not yet. But soon. You know these big events. Rebecca kept her voice light as Maria approached with her eternal clipboard. Something always goes wrong at the worst moment. Maria nodded slowly, her calculator clicking like nervous fingers. 20 years managing restaurant chains had taught her that numbers never lied, but people always did. Always. The single word carried weight. Maria's usual efficiency mask had cracks today, the same ones that had appeared 3 weeks ago when she'd called Rebecca at 2 a.m. They're separating families tomorrow. My daughter's in Block C. Rebecca recognized the tell. Maria's voice always pitched higher when she was scared. Wedding cakes are tricky. But you've never gotten the math wrong yet. Maria's shoulders relaxed a fraction, 15% over on portions. Either they're expecting no-shows or the guest list is bigger than we thought. Rebecca adjusted her tablet. I'll check the seating arrangements. What she actually checked were the facility schematics she'd stolen 3 weeks ago. Kitchen staff had facility-wide movement authorization. Storage areas, communication hubs, even restricted maintenance levels. The Resistance had found its logistics network. That night, Rebecca locked herself in the supply closet and allowed 30 seconds of pure terror. Her measuring tape rattled against the shelf as her hands shook. Not with rage this time, but with the crushing weight of 12,000 lives, depending on her ability to coordinate appetizer distribution into a military operation. What if I'm wrong? The thought she'd never allowed herself at any wedding, because wrong meant lawsuits. Here, wrong meant watching children die. She straightened her uniform and opened the door. Emily was depending on her. In her quarters, smaller than her old condo's coat closet, Rebecca spread the stolen schematics across her fold-down table. The chemical tang of alien cleaning supplies reminded her of hotel ballrooms at 3 a.m., prepping for celebrity weddings where every detail had to be flawless. She thought of Emily's last video call. Excited about debate team. Talking about changing her major to journalism, Emily, who would arrive in 68 hours and 17 minutes, Rebecca's fingers traced evacuation routes that would look like standard crowd flow patterns. Section A, families with children, positioned for quick access to maintenance tunnels. Like placing flower girls near the vestry exit, ready for anything. Section B, young adults, arranged for mobility and response capability. Her hands trembled as she placed tactical assets, knowing one miscalculation meant watching people die. Section C, elderly and disabled. Protected but not abandoned, every choice filtered through 15 years of managing events where failure meant professional destruction. Now, failure meant Emily dies. Sounds all wrong in here. James appeared at her workstation, weathered fingers unconsciously tapping jazz progressions against his tablet, like trying to play music in a mausoleum. Former audio engineer for venues from intimate clubs to stadium shows, James had the relaxed confidence of someone who'd prevented riots through proper sound design. His equipment modifications created communication shadows where humans could speak without alien monitoring. "These old venues have character," Rebecca said carefully. "Character, yeah. But sometimes," his eyes gleamed, "sometimes the best harmony comes from acoustic challenges." James's fingers stilled, the signal they'd developed over weeks of careful conversations. He'd been mapping the facility's communication network, finding frequencies the Vex couldn't monitor. Sarah Kim joined them, arms full of ceremonial arrangements that looked appropriately submissive while concealing sophisticated technology. Former botanical specialist for luxury hotels, she carried the particular grief of someone who understood living systems. "These flowers are dying." Sarah's voice was soft, clinical. Slowly, deliberately, her fingers traced petals with surgical gentleness. "But some things grow stronger when you try to kill them." Her delivery schedules coordinated intelligence gathering. Her botanical networks were becoming sensor arrays that would activate during the ceremony. David Park completed their team, a former wedding photographer who'd learned to document perfect moments while remaining invisible. His cameras were mapping security vulnerabilities, while his lighting requirements identified surveillance blind spots. "Interesting shadows developing," David mentioned, adjusting his equipment with obsessive precision. "Might need to optimize positioning." Rebecca felt the familiar satisfaction of watching specialists work. Like every successful event, success came from understanding how individual expertise created something larger than its parts. But unlike her Newport Beach weddings, this celebration would end with freedom instead of champagne. The audit was 3 hours early. Rebecca watched Vex security administrator Corvex's team spread through the facility like crystalline poison, checking every detail she'd spent weeks perfecting. Her hands remained steady, but inside, her carefully constructed plan began unraveling. 8 feet of bureaucratic suspicion, Corvex approached with secondary arms, constantly adjusting data displays. "Coordinator Sanders, statistical analysis indicates anomalous patterns. Efficiency metrics exceed baseline parameters by 11%. They were looking for the wrong things. But they might find the right ones by accident." Rebecca pulled up legitimate efficiency reports, her voice carrying 15 years of professional authority. "Improved vendor coordination. Cross-trained personnel, optimized supply chains." She gestured to timeline displays showing real improvements, concealing military-level coordination. Like any major event, efficiency comes from understanding connections. Corvex studied the data. Rebecca counted heartbeats, 47 seconds of suspended judgment. Acceptable parameters. Continue current protocols. As the audit team departed, Rebecca felt sweat cooling between her shoulder blades. The Morrison protocol had saved that wedding, but she remembered the cost. 3 hours afterward, vomiting from stress, while the bride danced to songs Rebecca would never hear without remembering how close everything had come to catastrophe. This time, there was no hospital waiting if she failed. At T-minus 36 hours, everything went wrong. "Section C's blocked." Maria's voice cracked through their secure channel. Maintenance shaft collapsed. 37 elderly humans trapped in the kill zone. Rebecca stared at her tablet, carefully planned escape routes dissolving into useless data. Her protection for the most vulnerable, gone. "This is why you don't improvise." Her father's voice, sharp as broken glass. But the plan was wrong. And some of those elderly humans had children in the ceremony. Grandchildren. Options? "Kitchen service elevator," James said immediately. "Connects to upper galleries, but it's slow. Exposed. Time to evacuate 37 people?" Sarah's fingers flew across calculations. 43 minutes. "We only have 47 minutes of ceremony time." Rebecca closed her eyes. Felt her measuring tape's familiar weight. When perfect fails, you don't panic. You adapt. New plan. "We extend the ceremony." But the universe wasn't finished testing her. At T-minus 6 hours, Zethus appeared beside the platform as Rebecca positioned final seating markers. His crystalline fingers traced the arrangement pattern. "Curious spacing, Coordinator Sanders." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. The spacing wasn't random, it was tactical positioning disguised as crowd flow optimization. Fire safety regulations. Human bodies require more space than Vex estimates account for. Zethis studied the pattern for 17 heartbeats. Efficiency through safety. Acceptable. He moved on, leaving Rebecca with shaking hands and the knowledge that they'd come within one observation of complete exposure. She caught Maria's eye across the plaza, saw the same recognition there. They were walking a razor's edge, and the slightest slip meant watching 12,000 people die, including Emily. The morning of Unity ceremony, 847, arrived with crisp efficiency. Rebecca coordinated from her command position, watching 12,000 humans file into precisely arranged seating sections. Every element appeared flawless to Vex observers. Her stomach churned with pre-event nausea, the same sick flutter from every wedding she'd ever managed. But underneath, the familiar pre-crisis calm settled into her bones. Zethis positioned himself at the VIP platform, crystalline form reflecting satisfaction. Efficiency parameters optimal. Cultural integration proceeding as designed. Rebecca checked her tablet. Emily's transport had arrived. Her sister was somewhere in that crowd. Section B, row 12, seat 7, exactly where Frank's calculations had placed her for optimal evacuation routes. At T+23 minutes. During symbolic gift presentation, Rebecca faced the decision that would transform Unity Ceremony 847 from compliance demonstration to declaration of war. Her finger hovered over the activation control. In her peripheral vision, she could see Emily's dark hair catching the overhead lights. 19 years old, still believing in happy endings. Every event tells a story, her mentor had said. Make sure it's the story you want to tell. Rebecca pressed the button. Nothing happened. For 3 heartbeats that lasted centuries, Rebecca thought she'd failed. That her modifications hadn't taken. That James's signal wouldn't broadcast. That 12,000 humans would pledge loyalty to their killers while she watched. Then, Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked across the plaza. Amazing grace. Rebecca's chest exploded with relief so intense she nearly collapsed. The old woman from Section A, grandmother of 3, chosen because her voice carried, and her courage was absolute. The signal had worked. 1 voice became 2, 2 became 20. 20 became 1,000. How sweet the sound. Rebecca watched Zethis reach for his communicator with the slow-motion clarity of adrenaline. His crystalline fingers moved like they were swimming through honey. James's jammers had kicked in. Electromagnetic static that would isolate every Vex communication device for exactly 47 minutes, the length of a standard Unity ceremony. Rebecca had planned this down to the second. Sarah's arrangements released communication devices disguised as pollen. David's cameras revealed their true purpose, jamming equipment providing crystal-clear human coordination channels. The ceremony platform vibrated with frequencies the Vex couldn't process. Harmonic rebellion in 47 languages. Rebecca's masterpiece unfolded in exactly 2.3 minutes. Her seating arrangements became tactical positions. Her vendor networks activated supply caches. Her timeline became military coordination, executed with wedding planner precision. Zethis studied the chaos with genuine confusion. In Vex society, improved performance meant optimal resource allocation. The concept of deception through competence didn't exist in their psychology. It would be their downfall. Section A. Families moved toward evacuation routes. Section B. Tactical groups secured control points. Section C. Elderly humans moved slowly but steadily toward the kitchen service elevator. 12,000 humans moved with unified purpose, guided by professional event coordination, perfected through years of managing Earth's most demanding celebrations. Rebecca stood in the facility's communication center, now under human control, coordinating evacuation with the precision of someone who'd managed 1,000-person receptions. Her tablet displayed matrices that surpassed her most complex Newport Beach events. The last transport ship disappeared into hyperspace 47 minutes later. The facility burned behind them, her life's work reduced to tactical necessity. All personnel evacuated, she reported. 0 casualties. template documented. In the transport's observation deck, Emily Sanders embraced her sister for the first time since Earth's fall. How? Rebecca smiled, thinking of every impossible wedding she'd ever saved. Same way I handle any event, Em. Perfect planning, precise execution, and absolute refusal to let anything go wrong. But as Earth grew larger in the viewport, Rebecca felt the weight of what came next. Her tablet chimed with messages: Portland facility, attempting replication, requesting coordination assistance, Detroit ceremony scheduled next week, audio specialist needed, botanical networks established in 6 facilities, ready for synchronized activation. Her team, scattered across the galaxy, still coordinating. Still trusting her to organize the impossible, she thought of other wedding planners receiving her coded vendor recommendations. How many would understand? How many would try? How many would die in facilities that weren't quite like 847 against aliens who wouldn't make the same mistakes as Zethys? Emily stirred against her shoulder, murmuring something about debate team tryouts. Rebecca opened her tablet and began drafting responses. There were more ceremonies to plan. Within days, 5 more Unity ceremonies had transformed into resistance operations. The Vex blamed equipment failures and human unpredictability. They never suspected their cultural integration program was being systematically dismantled by people who understood that managing large groups of humans wasn't about control. It was about coordination. Rebecca Sanders had spent 15 years ensuring life's most important celebrations went exactly according to plan. Her final event was humanity's liberation from Facility 847, executed with the same flawless precision she'd brought to every wedding. The only difference was that this time, the bride and groom were humanity and freedom, and Rebecca had made sure they'd live happily ever after. At least for today. Across the sector, event planners received coded messages disguised as vendor recommendations. The Vex had assumed human social gatherings were simple crowd management, not realizing that event coordination was one of humanity's most sophisticated organizational technologies. As Rebecca began planning her next event, smaller, more careful, but no less vital, she remembered her old professional motto: every event tells a story. Make sure it's the story you want to tell. This story was just beginning, and now she knew the cost of each chapter.